Hi, welcome to Cousin Culture for May 9th, 2018. We're going to finally be discussing The Martian. The movie came out in 2015. It was one of my favorite movies of all of the year. I really liked this film. And so there might be times during this discussion where I seem like I'm criticizing it, and I'm not, because I think ultimately the movie is, like I said, I think it's a comedy. Or principally a comedy, or mostly a comedy. Whatever you want to say about sort of Alexander Payne's work, I think The Martian ultimately has sort of the same sort of quality to it. So I actually think the easiest way of looking at sort of a farce, which is if you ludicrously improbable situations or exaggerate or extravagant and thus improbable situations, because I think ultimately it's so. The thing is, if you're talking about like what genre The Martian goes into, obviously you should just say science fiction, but that's not a category of the Golden Globes, so you have to make a decision whether or not it's a drama or a comedy. And I think ultimately, because it's somewhat farcical and that it has exaggerated, extravagant situations, it makes the movie very improbable. Here's the thing: it's improbable, not impossible. I don't really care, and I can't imagine why anyone would. About whether or not the science overall in the film is accurate or whatnot. Because, and I think this is something that's really important about discussing The Martian, is the movie's not, so the central theme or central sort of thing it's trying to get, and another reason why I think it's a comedy is that it's trying to portray the process of science, of doing science, and then sort of the international character of all different nationalities and types of people and disciplines like botany, etc. Botany, astrodynamics, medicine, whatever the discipline is, all coming together, just working in sort of harmony. And so anyway, so the reason why I think this movie should ultimately be considered a farce is, okay, so if you haven't seen it, which, by the way, if you haven't seen it, go see it. It's a damn good film. It's very clever, and again, it's very funny. It's but okay, so what it is it's this guy named Mark Watney who is left on Mars. And it's his trying to survive, and he goes through a series of sort of misadventures that influences his survival chances. Now, here's the thing about this, is I think, now that sort of sounds like a drama, but it's about a guy who's trying to survive on Mars. But here's the thing, I don't think there was ever a real chance in this movie that Mark Watney would have died. I think the movie itself raises this as a possibility very early on in the story to ultimately dismiss it. And so it comes across as much more about a series of engineering puzzles about how to get a guy to survive on Mars that then are solved. And so even though like the character thinks he's going to die, and that's correct, sort of authentically within the story, I, as an audience member, never believed Watney was ever going to die, because he largely does not face critical challenges. So what ends up being the thing, and I think this is the movie, anyone who wants to discuss this movie is ultimately on the horns of a dilemma. In that, if you try to say it's not a farce or not a comedy, then you're dealing with a series of engineering challenges which he solves in an improbable ways, and it seems like repeatedly that there's just a lot of coincidences or cheats dramatically, even though because of the way in which they solve it. And so like a good example of this, I'll have two good examples of this, is he has to, at one point in the movie, Watney has to get his rover warmer without using the heater. So all he ends up doing is digging up a big box of plutonium and putting it into the back of his car, which that thing never busts open. It never, it was only, so like, that's not set up in the movie. It's not set up in the movie prior that they dug this thing. Or they have a big box of plutonium. It's just at the end of it, that's what he ends up doing to warming himself. Or another good example of this is they try to get him food again by launching a rocket, and it blows up. And immediately afterwards, the Chinese space agency calls him and say, "Hey, we have this rocket, and you can have it." And like, so that sort of thing that happens a lot in this movie, where there's just a ton of good fortune, which is fine. I'm not trying to pick on the movie here because but I think if you want to say that's really sort of dramatic, it worked, and it's something of a cheat that he keeps solving the problem because there's a MacGuffin. There's a it's not quite a Deus Ex, but there's always seems to be a Deus Ex Machina. Or another sort of good example of this is Ares 3, the mission site is just within driving distance of a probe from 1997, as opposed to the other side of the planet. So there's a lot of things where I'm sure it's all sort of scientifically plausible, but Mark Watney gets incredibly lucky throughout this entire film of solving all these various puzzles because he just happens to have enough of the material around him by good fortune. And so I think you end up having to say this movie is either sort of a farce in the sense that it's like a series of MacGyver puzzles, which he solves because he had such good fortune in getting them, or if you say it's a drama, then and in fact it's not a very good drama because then it's constantly undercutting its own tension. And so that's sort of the argument I'm putting forward to it. Now, again, that makes it sound like I'm complaining about the movie, but I'm not. I actually adore this film because I think it's ultimately a very, very moving sort of comedy, farcical exploration of science and thinking about the engineering puzzles. It has to be that lighter, fluffier sort of thing because dramatically it doesn't work that way. Anyway, so let me pause there and show a couple of clips. Okay, so the first couple of scenes I'm going to show you are at the early part of the movie, and it's Watney talking to NASA. And the first scene is him. It's probably one of the most dramatic scenes in the film, but there's still a big joke in the middle of it when he says surprise. But the thing is, the reason why I'm showing you this scene is he raises a whole bunch of possibilities here about how he could die. They could run out of food, the water could go away, or the air could break. And the thing is, by far and large, once these 2 or 3 possibilities are raised, the other 2 are never mentioned again, are the water and air, especially the water. It's brought up and then immediately sort of dismissed. And that's sort of the thing about this movie, why I don't think there's a hell of a lot of suspense about him actually surviving. Excuse me. Because in stories, you always are supposed to be expecting the unexpected. So he himself raises these 2 possibilities, so we know because of how stories go that these 2 possibilities aren't actually going to occur within the story. Or even the food isn't really, he never really runs out of food, even though that would be a source of tension. The other sort of thing is, again, I'm talking about sort of a series of good fortunes and improbable events, and the fact that he gets speared here such that his life monitor gets destroyed, but the blood seals the hole. Like, that's good luck. Okay? So, The next scene is going to be him talking about how he's going to survive. And again, the potatoes that they have, that they had it for Thanksgiving, a bit of good luck. Now, here's the thing. The other sort of thing that's sort of funny, and what I mean by sort of engineering puzzles, is there's a lot of scenes in the movies like this where Matt Damon, Mark Martin as the character, is explaining the science or the exposition to a journal, which is how he's going to do. And unfortunately, Matt Damon does this very, very well, such that it's funny and light. It's also lucky that Watney's the botanist, right? But it's also very comedic because, like, here, fear my botany powers. Like, there's no real reason for that line. Now, the next little bit is, okay, so he's making farmland, and he obviously has to make water, but here's the thing. He's about to blow himself up here. And you know this is going to happen, and you know it's going to be okay because of all the setup. But the fact that Happy Days is playing in the background, you know this isn't going to be a huge issue. Even though it should. And so this is really not that dramatic. It's much more of like a slapsticky sort of moment in the film. Especially since, as you can see here, you actually have the smoke coming off of him. So all these three scenes happen all within the first third of the movie. And you kind of already get the sense that it's if he hasn't died yet, then he's probably never going to die. But that's not really sort of definitive. And it's all sort of in that nice gray zone between comedy and drama. But there's another scene coming up, which is the last one I want to show you, and specifically a cut. So they just found... This is the people in NASA, the director of NASA, public relations, the flight director, blah, 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 or director of the program, whatever. And they just discovered Mark Watney is alive, and they're going to say here, my God, he's alive. How the hell could, how is he dealing with this? What is his psychology, etc. And I also have to say this, again, Kristen Wiig being in this scene, and her making jokes about, oh, my bad, America, about, Dear America, the astronaut we didn't actually kill, also sort of makes us comedic. But there's going to be a cut here where the director, the guy on the right, is going to say, what the hell is he thinking? What's his psychology? And he's going to cut immediately to Matt Damon, Watney, going, I'm going to really die here if I have to listen to one more god-awful disco song. Now, here's the thing. That not only is that a very, very funny line, but I think if you interpret this movie as a drama or as or not this sort of other form, is that line is critically undermining of the drama. Now, it works because I think the movie is ultimately a sort of a farcical exploration of science. But it undermines all sort of tensions because it turns the entire notion of him surviving into this huge sort of punchline about disco music. And so it's for that reason that I really think if you're trying to say this is just a drama, you have to, like, this scene kind of ruins the film as a drama. Now, fortunately, it's a comedy. Okay, hi. I'm going to do this video a little bit different. I'm going to switch now to some more institutional thing. Okay, so obviously I'm only having this conversation. Well, I probably would always think it's a comedy upon seeing it, but this topic occurred to me as a thing to talk about because of the Golden Globes. And you might just be wondering, hey, man, you're trying to backload or defend the Golden Globes. They only classified it as a comedy because they wanted to give it the award. And here's the thing. I think that's actually true. I'm not trying to so much defend the Golden Globes because the Golden Globes are ridiculous. And I'm not arguing that the sort of dilemma I've been portraying here with the clips and everything is what the Golden Globes were thinking. They just wanted to, they really liked The Martian, but they didn't want to put it in the drama category. But But the thing is, if you look actually at, let's see if I can't find them. Let's see. Did I skip over it? The thing is, drama. That's maybe at the end. There it is. If you look at this, The Big Short, it was all, and Joy. Then all of Alexander Payne's stuff is also always listed in the comedy section. So the Golden Globes has been doing this. It's just people really freaked the fuck out over The Martian being included in the comedy, even though I think it's actually a very defensible choice, even though the Golden Globes are just being ridiculous in the sense that they don't actually think this. So what I'm trying to say is, I don't think any of the Golden Globes people actually sat down and thought about this or anything like that. They happened to be, so they're saying, they happen to be saying something true about The Martian, but they're doing it sort of inadvertently because they're being cynical and category stuff. So you want to still say whether the Golden Globes are corrupt on this issue, fine, whatever. That's not really my concern or interest. Now, the other thing I want to point out, and I pointed this out, during The Descendants, is there's a ton, so like Matthew Lillard being in The Descendants in that category, him being principally a comedian, references the other comedic works, so it keeps sort of the intertextuality of the situation, makes its Descendants keep its comedy. Well, the thing is, a lot of the cast in The Martian has that sort of quality. So like Kristen Wiig is principally a comedic actress. Michael Pena is principally the sidekick or comic relief character, like an Ant-Man, for example. Matt Damon, the main character, of course, he isn't just a comedic actor, but he has done a lot of comedic performances, like Stuck on You, for example. Jeff Daniels, principally a character actor, but probably his most famous role is Dumb and Dumber, etc. Now, obviously, like Jessica Chastain is not a comedic actress, however you say his name, etc. But people like Benedict Wong plays it. So the cast itself is also sort of mixed, and I think that's important because when Kristen Wiig shows up, it reinforces the notion, again, because I think the central tension in this film is about whether or not Watney is going to die. And I'm not convinced. I'm convinced that within the first 15 minutes of the film, that possibility is closed off by the text of the film. So you already know he's going to survive. So there's no real tension within the movie because it's just those series of engineering puzzles. So there's that. Now, the other thing I really, so that's going to be it for this section. Let me give you a sec. Now, it's not just the central plot. So this next group of clips is going to show some of the more things that are only in the movie because to be funny. So this Kristen Wiig has this thing about her two deadbeat husbands, and then there's sort of banter that goes on between them. That there's no reason for that bit of information or anything else in the movie dramatically, and it's not just comedic relief, because that's sort of the defining characteristic of that woman, because that was really her only sort of character-driven scene. Now, this group next scene is him getting together Pathfinder, which again is sort of a good fortune that he's so close to the Pathfinder site. And so there's specifically one character here, that guy, the computer tech guy. He's going to be incredibly passive aggressive over the next couple of scenes, and again, it's sort of his characteristic is to be this sort of snooty passive-aggressive tech person. But the thing is, it's not just a one-off. It's actually a running gag, not only through the sequence, but also Benedict Wong, the character in charge of Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He seems vaguely incompetent at his job when it comes to other people. And he always seems like NASA's going to yell at him. And so I'm not going to show it, but there's a whole series of jokes about him needing to change his clothes. His co-workers always have like signs telling him what to say, etc. He's constantly butting heads, and so it's sort of this vaudevillian bit. And so this moment right here with this sort of passive-aggressive lab tech, I don't think it's just sort of comedic overtones. I think it actually fundamentally again reinforces the point that Mark Watney is going to die, not going to die, and that this is all going to work out. And so it makes sort of the puzzles of the engineer. It makes the what should be dramatic tensions more engineering puzzles. So the movie comes across very much like a series of MacGyver-esque episodes, and so because of that, I don't think it's really. It's not the most comedic comedy ever made, but it's not. It's not dramatic, and I really, again, going back to that Homer dilemma. Okay, so then this sequences, they finally got connected, and there's specifically one bit here because he's going to be really angry because Dean's not been told that he's alive, that the crew hasn't been told he's been alive, and there's a joke about being vulgar because he's gonna says this is such a we don't even know, but if it involves the word Fletcher, don't Google it, which is actually sort of the joke. And so Teddy, who's the director of NASA, the joke is he has to communicate, tell the president what this means. Now here's the thing: this sequence is incredibly implausible. In terms of professionalism and everything like that. No NASA astronaut would ever probably say this. And even if they did say it, the reaction would not be this really subdued sort of thing where people kind of have a laugh about it. So again, the movie, again, this is why I kind of think it's something of like a farce, is sort of the politics and the human aspect of the story is not really all that realistic regardless of the science, the hard sciences. Now, going back to what I was saying, I spent so much time talking about Alexander Payne. Alexander Payne's filmography is a very serious. I haven't seen Downsizing, but Downsizing, incidentally, for Matt Damon for the cast as well, which is common. The Alexander Payne films are often have this quality where they're both sort of dramatic and comedic at the same time, and I really think The Martian also has that quality. So because a lot of times when this conversation comes up, Honest Trailers did that. They always have that scene, which I'm not going to show. They always have that scene with him sitting on the rock where he's telling he's telling the commander, hey, go tell my dead parent, my parents that I die, but I love what I'm doing, blah, blah, blah. Now, that scene belongs there, and it's correct that the character feels that, but the thing is, that scene by itself doesn't override anything in terms of the overall structure of the film. Now, because again, the character thinks he's going to die, but I think it's that thought of his is sort of detached from the audience expectations given the rest of the context of the film. And so I think even though Ridley Scott and Alexander Payne are two profoundly different filmmakers, and The Martian is actually a very unusual film for Ridley Scott because one, it's a comedy, but two, it's a very, very light film. And I think ultimately the scene on Alexander, the scene on the rock doesn't prevent it from being a comedy in the same ways that, like, in Sideways, the scene where Miles utterly breaks down and says that he's an insignificant writer, or in The Descendants when Matt is saying goodbye to his wife, or in the last scene in About Schmidt, all these films, which are, again, comedies, always have it, that one or two scenes which are more dramatic, because, again, the form isn't really caught between, it's an in-between sort of form where it's sort of both at the same time. Now, sort of continuing the theme of things that just occurred because of it, there's this character, Rich Purnell, and he's the one who sort of solves it, and this is his introductory scene, and it's totally a slapstick moment, because he's going to get up here, probably drink awful coffee, and then spin it into a trash can that is not actually a can, it's just wire, which is hysterical. Then he's going to get up and fall again. And this guy is the one who ultimately comes up with the solution to get Watney home, that he's introduced in this sort of comedic way, makes it seem, again, much more, not dire life and death, but much more like an intellectual puzzle or game that the story is playing about how to solve this engineering problem. And so there's that. I gotta say, Daniel Glover is very, very funny in this scene. And this is sort of reinforced because of the next sequence. What you're seeing right here is a meeting about his solution to getting Watney home. And it begins with this there's a little bit of a diatribe about the Council of Elrond, and of course that's Sean Bean, so there's an in-joke because he's Boromir, so he's at the two councils of Elrond, and he's the one who explains it to everyone. So there's that in-joke as well. So again, I think this stuff isn't just fundamentally comedic or overtones. I think it actually undermines the tension in the story if it's pure drama. Likewise, there's a ton of shit of stuff like this, and like him joking with Johannes about him touching the cam, where it's just there to be funny. Okay, so the sort of the last bit of point before the last set of clips is, I think a lot of the visceral reaction against this being classified as a comedy I also is because of it being a pro-science sort of movie. But the thing is, and this might seem a little bit weird, I think the version of science in the film is, like everything, dealing with everything outside, anything dealing with human beings outside of the hard sciences is incredibly implausible. No way would China just randomly give us the US a rocket. No way would most Americans care about this ongoing drama about Watney. And especially post-Trumpism, the international community is not going to be helping the U.S. So all the sort of political and social aspects of the film are incredibly implausible, but which is fine, because what the movie is actually ends up doing is it's creating a fantastical or a romantic version of how science ultimately sort of works, or how science, how life should be. And so in a lot of ways, and I realize this could be seem sort of dismissive, I actually think it's actually somewhat like a romantic comedy, in that no romantic relationship, no sexual relationship, no erotic relationship has ever worked like it has worked in a romantic comedy. It's just, there's just nothing similar to how the movie works, to how movies work, and how romance actually works, because of just the nature of human beings. But romantic comedies end up elevating or creating these sort of heightened realities where they're not how they're supposed. Like, it's the relationship in romantic comedies are not how people think they do work, but how people wish they worked. And I think that's ultimately true for The Martian, that this isn't how science works. This isn't how politics act. This isn't how people in society would actually process this. because I just use a random thought because of I just saw evolution, like less than 10, something like 15% of Americans actually accept evolution in as its in all its forms. 42% are young Earth creationists, so huzzah! And so for that reason, I think there's a lot of visual reaction because you're a comedy, so it can't be serious. Well, the thing is, it is serious in the sense that the sort of way in which the science works in The Martian, that would be a really great ideal to try to follow, but that's not actually how it works. So it's sort of it's like a romantic comedy. It's how we think science ought to work, even though we recognize it's not how it actually works. And so in that sense, it's sort of in the realm of the sort of more comedic. And so the thing is, I don't think there's anything wrong. I don't think the movie is less serious because it is comedic in that way. I actually think it's somewhat more serious because we sort of, and this is one of the jokes of the movie, we actually recognize watching it that the politics of this film are blinkered and fantastical and not how it would actually go. And because of that, excuse me, it's like a romance, a strange romance, if I can randomly quote how Harry Stephen Keeler. Okay, so that's going to be, I'm going to show a couple more clips and that's going to be it for Cubs and Culture. Now, finally, to wrap up everything I was going to say for the last little clip, this is towards the end of the movie, and he's traveling here, and he has this goddamn pup tent. Now, here's the thing. I think this pup tent dramatically is a total cheat. Because why the hell would he have a pup tent? Because it seems like something you would have for this journey. But again, it works fine within the context of a comedy because the drama isn't overly, like, it undermines, it makes it much more like an engineering thing. Like, let's see what a pup tent for a Martian would look like. Okay, so that's going to be it for Cubs and Culture. Have a good day.